1973. On the set of Kung Fu, the director drew a breath to yell action. Jock Mahoney stepped into the frame. He was a 220-pound titan, the ultimate Hollywood alpha who built his legend diving down fatal staircases. But he never threw a single punch. He simply collapsed into the dirt. A catastrophic stroke severed his nervous system, permanently chaining the industry's greatest symbol of physical masculinity to a wheelchair. His ultimate bankruptcy was not measured in lost dollars. It was paid in shattered bones, depleted blood, and a chilling moral blind spot. The harsh, unforgiving California sun baked the dry dirt of the Warner Brothers backlot. It was 1973. The Panavision cameras were locked into position, their glass lenses focused sharply on a meticulously constructed western town set designed for the hit television series, Kung Fu. Dozens of crew members moved in a coordinated, silent dance. They adjusted canvas light diffusers and dragged black audio cables through the dust. The atmosphere on a professional film set right before the camera rolls is a specific, pressurized vacuum. Conversations die, breathing slows, and every eye in the vicinity locks onto the space in front of the lens. Into this expectant silence stepped Jock Mahoney. At 54 years old, he did not walk onto the set. He occupied it. He possessed a physical presence that seemed to actively bend the air around him. He was a towering, rugged monument of bone and dense muscle, carrying the distinct swagger of a man who spent his adult life dictating terms to gravity. This was the era where the American cultural landscape worshipped at the altar of the raw, untamed macho man. Society demanded heroes forged from iron, men who solved complex problems with split-second reflexes and brute physical force. Mahoney was the living, breathing embodiment of that national fantasy. Every scar on his chin and every thick vein mapping his forearms was a testament to a life lived on the dangerous edge of human capability. The crew members watched him with quiet reverence. They expected to witness the legendary kinetic energy that defined his career. A sudden burst of violence, a choreographed strike, a display of unadulterated power. The director stood beside the camera operator, raising his hand. He drew a breath into his lungs, his mouth opening to shout the command that would trigger the action. But the command never came. Before the syllable could form on the director's tongue, a silent, microscopic rebellion occurred within the intricate architecture of Mahoney's biology. There was no warning. There was no dramatic music swelling in the background. No heroic standoff. No external enemy to fight or outsmart. It began as a tiny, invisible misfire inside the delicate vascular network of his brain. A clot. A sudden blockage, a terrifying interruption of the life-giving blood flow to a critical sector of his nervous system. Mahoney felt a strange, chilling wave of numbness wash over the left side of his face. The sensation was alien. He was a master of his own anatomy, a man who spent decades calculating the exact trajectory of his body flying through the air, controlling every muscle fiber to ensure he landed safely on the dirt. His mind issued a frantic, immediate command to his legs to shift his weight, to plant his leather boots firmly into the ground to maintain his balance. For the first time in 54 years, the flesh refused the order. The neural signal, traveling down the spinal cord, vanished into a dark, dead void. The connection between his fierce, commanding will and his muscular frame was violently, permanently severed. The crew, watching through the viewfinder and standing just feet away, witnessed something that defied their basic understanding of the man before them. They did not see a stunt. They saw the sudden, terrifying surrender of a titan. The 220-pound frame began to sway, stripped of all its natural tension and grace. His knees, joints that absorbed the impact of 1,000 high-speed jumps, simply buckled inward. Gravity, an old adversary he mocked and cheated for half a century, finally reached up and seized him with unbreakable authority. He did not execute a trained, professional role to distribute the impact. He fell with the uncontrolled stiffness of a felled oak tree. His shoulder and head struck the hard, packed earth of the film set with a dull, sickening thud that echoed across the silent backlot. A small cloud of dust bloomed around his motionless body. The illusion of the invincible American action hero shattered into a million jagged pieces in that exact fraction of a second. The collective gasp from the crew was the sound of a myth dying in real time. The human body is a resilient machine, but it keeps a meticulous, unforgiving ledger. For decades, Mahoney treated his flesh and bone as an expendable resource, a cheap currency used to purchase fame, applause, and staggering box office returns. He battered it, bruised it, pushed it past the threshold of human endurance, and demanded that it heal on command. Lying in the dirt of the kung fu set, his body officially went on strike. The stroke was the brutal retaliation from a physical form squeezed dry. When the dust settled and the frantic rush of paramedics descended upon the set, the harsh reality of his new existence began to take shape. The towering, rugged leading man who walked onto the lot that morning would never walk off of it. The hospital doors swung shut, and when they opened again, the world was introduced to the cruelest paradox the entertainment industry had ever produced. The legendary Jock Mahoney, the man whose entire identity, livelihood, and cultural value were intrinsically tied to his boundless physical mobility, was lowered into the seat of a wheelchair. Look closely at the cold, sterile design of that medical device. It is constructed of shining chrome, taut canvas, and rubber tires. For a man who spent his life leaping over saloon bars and riding wild stallions across open plains, this chair was not a medical aid. It was a custom-built, suffocating prison cell. The narrow armrests acted as iron bars, caging his thick, powerful arms. The footrests served as shackles, grounding the legs that once propelled him through the air. He was trapped. His mind, still sharp, still craving the adrenaline and the danger of the open set, was locked inside a biological shell that became a tomb. He was forced to sit in agonizing stillness, a restless soul anchored to a machine, watching the world move forward at a speed he could no longer match. The wheelchair rolled silently across the floor, a monument to the terrifying frailty of the human condition. It carried the broken remains of a man who dared to believe he was made of steel. Rewind the tape. Erase the agonizing image of the wheelchair. Wipe away the suffocating dust of the 1973 film set. To accurately measure the catastrophic depth of a fallen monument, you must first stand at its base, crane your neck upward, and comprehend its original, staggering height. Before his biology staged a violent rebellion, Jock Mahoney was not merely a participant in the American entertainment industry. He was a soaring, indestructible titan who carved his legacy out of the dangerous, hidden bedrock of the studio system. He did not enter the prestigious gates of Hollywood through a padded, velvet-lined acting conservatory. He clawed his way into the blinding arc lights from the dirt, the sweat, and the broken glass of the stuntman fraternity. In the golden age of American cinema, the public worshipped the flawless faces of the leading men. They adored the pristine smiles and the perfectly combed hair. But behind the camera, a gritty, unglamorous reality existed. The major studios operated a brutal assembly line of hidden flesh and bone to manufacture the myth of the invincible hero. When a script demanded a man crash a galloping horse through a plate glass window, leap from a blazing rooftop, or absorb a bone-shattering blow to the jaw, the pampered superstar retreated to a canvas folding chair. The stuntman stepped forward into the fire. They were the silent, working-class gladiators of the silver screen. They bled in the shadows, so the handsome idols could bathe in the applause. Jock Mahoney was the undisputed, reigning king of this bruised and battered brotherhood. He was a breathtaking specimen of human engineering. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing a dense, muscular 220 pounds, he did not just occupy physical space, he commanded it. He moved with the terrifying, calculated grace of an apex predator. The major studios recognized this raw, unbridled kinetic energy and deployed him as the ultimate physical shield for their most expensive, fragile investments. Look at the holy trinity of mid-century cinematic masculinity: Gregory Peck, Errol Flynn, John Wayne. The ticket-buying public believed they were watching these legendary icons perform superhuman feats of courage. In reality, they were watching Jock Mahoney. He was the nameless, faceless engine driving the greatest heroes of the era. He strapped on their tailored costumes, turned his face away from the lens, and threw his frame into the danger zone. He absorbed the crushing impacts, dusted off the dirt, and quietly walked away, allowing another man to claim the thunderous cheers of the movie-going public. The sheer magnitude of his physical courage was forever etched into Hollywood lore during the production of the 1948 swashbuckling epic, Adventures of Don Juan. The script required a death-defying leap down a sweeping interior staircase. This was an era devoid of hidden safety wires, digital manipulation, or inflatable crash pads. A stunt of this caliber required an unforgiving calculation of human velocity against hard, polished oak. The director called for action. The soundstage fell into a nervous, breathless silence. Mahoney stood at the precipice, looking down at the staggering drop. He did not hesitate. He launched his 220-pound frame into the air. He soared over the ornate banisters, executing a flawless, heart-stopping descent. He hit the target mark with the precision of a guided weapon, absorbed the kinetic shock through his knees, rolled gracefully, and stood up. The studio executives, standing behind the monitors in disbelief, reached into their pockets. For that single, momentary defiance of gravity, they handed him a flat cash fee of $1,000. In the late 1940s, $1,000 for a few seconds of labor was a mythical sum. It was a physical testament to his irreplaceable value. He looked a broken neck directly in the eye, smiled, and walked away with a fortune in his hand. But a man possessing that specific brand of authentic magnetism cannot be kept hidden behind the backs of other actors forever. The camera lens possesses an innate, uncompromising ability to recognize the genuine article. Producers realized that Mahoney was far more than a disposable human crash test dummy. He possessed the chiseled jawline, the piercing gaze, and the natural charisma of a leading man. They pulled him out of the shadows, brushed off the stunt dust, and thrust him directly into the center of the frame as the star of the hit television series, The Range Rider. The transition was seismic. The American public, accustomed to watching theater-trained actors awkwardly pretend to fight, were suddenly confronted with a man who actually knew how to throw a devastating, street-level punch. The audiences noticed the difference immediately. When the Range Rider mounted a horse, it was not a carefully framed shot of an actor sitting on a stationary barrel. It was Mahoney, vaulting into the saddle with explosive power. The directors no longer needed to yell, "Cut," to bring in a stunt double. The camera could stay wide, capturing the fluid sequence of violence and heroism in a single, unbroken take, because the actor and the stuntman were the exact same person. Every movement he made on screen radiated an authentic, rugged truth. He brought a gritty, blue-collar realism to the pristine world of the Western genre, cementing his status as a genuine idol for millions of children and adults alike. This unwavering commitment to physical authenticity reached its glorious zenith when he was chosen to embody the legendary king of the jungle, Tarzan. The role of Tarzan is the ultimate cinematic litmus test. There are no cowboy hats to hide beneath, no tailored suits to conceal a softening physique, and no stunt doubles to take the fall. It is an unadulterated display of primal human strength. Jock Mahoney stepped into this iconic role at the age of 44. He was officially the oldest actor in cinematic history to take on the physically punishing mantle. Yet, stripped down to a simple loincloth, standing beneath the glare of the studio lights and the harsh sun of location shoots, he presented a physique carved from seasoned mahogany. He refused to let a younger, unknown athlete swing from the high vines or wrestle in the murky, unpredictable rivers. He was the star, and he was his own insurance policy. He swung through the dense jungle canopies with the raw power of a silverback. He plunged into rushing waters and engaged in brutal, hand-to-hand combat scenes that left production crews breathless. At 44 years old, an age when the vast majority of leading men begin demanding softer lighting and transitioning to quiet, sedentary character roles, Mahoney was operating at the peak of human physical potential. He defied the natural aging process through sheer, stubborn willpower and relentless physical conditioning. He was a god of the jungle, an invincible monument of American masculinity. He proved to the world that his brand of heroism was not a cheap Hollywood illusion created in an editing room, but a tangible reality forged in sweat, iron, and a refusal to let any other man take his risks. But a monument built of human flesh is not stone. It cracks, it splinters. Turn over the gilded Hollywood contract, wipe away the shine of the marquee lights, and the horrifying medical ledger of Jock Mahoney's career is exposed. The public relations machine relentlessly promoted his authentic, stunt double-free performances as a testament to his superhuman stamina. It was a brilliant marketing strategy that sold millions of tickets. But inside the unforgiving ecosystem of the 1950s studio system, that specific claim was not a badge of honor. It was a binding biological death sentence. The studios did not view an actor as a human being requiring rest and recuperation. They viewed them as expensive, insured industrial machinery that needed to be operated at maximum capacity to guarantee a high quarterly return on investment. If a machine breaks down, you force it to keep running until the gears shear off. We must forensically examine the brutal physical mathematics of just one specific production cycle. During the filming of his hit television series, The Range Rider, Mahoney was subjected to a level of physical punishment that would permanently cripple an ordinary man. This was a grueling, fast-paced television production schedule. There was no time for meticulous safety checks. There was no budget for padded stunt mats or choreographed rehearsal periods. Directors demanded raw action, and they demanded it immediately. In the span of creating those 78 episodes, the medical toll on Mahoney's frame was staggering. The official documented records show 4 separate instances of minor bone fractures. Consider the sharp, blinding pain of a cracked rib or a fractured wrist bone. Now, consider the terrifying reality of the studio system. A fractured bone did not grant him a medical leave of absence. A production delay meant financial losses for the network. He was expected to quietly tape up the injury, suppress the agonizing pain with crude painkillers, pull his heavy leather gloves back on, and jump back onto the horse for the next take. He was forced to fight, fall, and ride while the jagged edges of his own bones ground against each other inside his skin. But the broken bones were merely the superficial damage. The true, insidious horror of his physical decline was actively occurring deep inside his skull. The Range Rider was famous for its chaotic, kinetic fistfights. These were not the gentle, stylized brawls of modern cinema. Actors frequently missed their marks. Heavy wooden props shattered with unpredictable force. The ground was hard, unforgiving California dirt. Throughout the production, Mahoney suffered an incredible 16 documented head injuries, 16 severe traumas to the brain. We now possess the advanced medical knowledge to understand the terrifying implications of repeated concussions. When a 220-pound man takes a blow to the jaw or falls backward onto solid ground, his brain violently strikes the inside of his skull. The delicate neural pathways stretch, tear, and hemorrhage. The brain immediately requires a significant period of darkness, silence, and rest to repair the microscopic damage. Mahoney was never granted that vital recovery period. The brutal shooting schedule dictated that he be standing in front of the camera, delivering dialogue, the very next morning. His brain was forced to operate while bleeding and swelling. The trauma compounded. The microscopic tears accumulated. On 3 separate, horrifying occasions during the filming of the series, the impact to his head was so severe that he was knocked unconscious on the set. Consider the chilling scene. The director yells action, the fight scene commences, and the leading man goes down hard. He does not get up. He lies motionless in the dust, his brain effectively shutting down to protect itself from further trauma. The frantic crew throws cold water on his face, slapping his cheeks to drag him back to consciousness. The moment his eyes fluttered open, the moment he could slur out a coherent sentence, the director would bark the order to reset the camera. The machine had to keep moving. The episode had to air on Saturday night. He was trapped in a toxic cycle of constant physical destruction. The adrenaline of the performance and the crushing pressure of his contractual obligations forced him to ignore the screaming alarms of his own biology. He was a man exchanging the structural integrity of his own skeleton and the neurological health of his own brain for a weekly paycheck and the fleeting adoration of the American public. Every single time he launched himself off a balcony, every time he absorbed a punch, he was quietly depositing another layer of irreversible damage into his own biological bank account. The studios were extracting his life force, frame by frame, punch by punch. He built an empire of cinematic masculinity, but the mortar holding those bricks together was his own blood, his own shattered bones, and the silent accumulation of a neurological debt that would eventually demand to be paid in full. Those 16 concussions left microscopic scars across his neural pathways, a silent debt waiting to be collected. But the final, catastrophic blow that guaranteed his eventual collapse did not come from a missed punch or a splintering wooden chair. It came from an enemy that could not be fought, outrun, or intimidated by sheer physical size. In 1963, Hollywood executives made a fateful, arrogant decision. They decided to pull Tarzan out of the controlled, sanitized, and engineered studio environments of Los Angeles and drop him into the actual wilderness. Production for the film Tarzan's 3 Challenges relocated across the globe to the dense, unforgiving jungles of Thailand. This logistical shift was steeped in a specific, dangerous breed of mid-century American hubris. It was the prevailing cultural belief that American muscle, sheer willpower, and a square jaw could effortlessly conquer any wild frontier on the planet. Mahoney, standing at 6 feet 4 inches and carrying 220 pounds of sculpted armor, walked into the Asian canopy, expecting nature to yield to his celebrity presence. He viewed the jungle as just another painted movie set, a green backdrop designed to highlight his physique. The jungle, ancient and indifferent, viewed him merely as prey. The reality of the Thai wilderness stripped away the comfortable cinematic illusion. The heat was not a simple temperature change registered on a thermometer. It was a physical, suffocating weight pressing down on the chest from the moment the sun breached the horizon. The humidity hovered near maximum capacity, turning the air into a stagnant green soup that clung to the inside of the lungs and stubbornly refused to let sweat evaporate from the skin. Within this sweltering oven, the Hollywood Titan was required to strip down to his trademark minimal loincloth. He exposed miles of bare, unprotected flesh to an ecosystem designed by evolution to break down and consume organic matter. He waded waist-deep into murky, stagnant rivers to wrestle mechanical beasts and swing from low-hanging vines, unaware that the actual killers were microscopic. They were swarming in the millions just beneath the water's surface, breeding in the damp soil, and hovering in the humid air. The jungle did not bother to challenge his muscular strength or his meticulously rehearsed stunt training. It bypassed his formidable exterior entirely, launching a coordinated biological siege directly into his unprotected bloodstream and his vulnerable digestive tract. First came the dysentery. The contaminated local water and unfamiliar food sources tore through his intestinal lining with the efficiency of a razor blade. This is not a mere stomach ailment to be cured with an afternoon of rest. It is a relentless, agonizing purging of the body's essential fluids. Every drop of water he managed to swallow was almost immediately expelled, taking vital electrolytes, sodium, and nutrients with it. His core began to dehydrate at an alarming rate. The dense muscles that allowed him to execute flawless backflips, grapple with stuntmen, and vault onto horseback rely entirely on cellular hydration and mineral balance to function. As the dysentery drained him dry, those massive muscles began to cramp, seize, and involuntarily spasm. To survive the severe caloric deficit, his body began to cannibalize its own tissue, burning muscle for basic fuel. He was bleeding internally, his digestive system turning to inflamed tissue. Yet the brutal filming schedule demanded he stand up, smile through the agony, and flex his deteriorating physique for the camera lens. While his gut was hemorrhaging and his hydration levels plummeted, the mosquito-borne dengue fever took root deep inside his blood. Medical professionals referred to dengue as breakbone fever for a terrifying, accurate reason. The virus induces a deep, blinding ache inside the skeletal structure itself. It feels as though the marrow is physically swelling, pressing outward against the rigid bone, turning every joint into a pocket of crushed glass. The man who leaped down solid oak staircases for a living, absorbing external impacts with a smile, was now experiencing excruciating, paralyzing pain just shifting his body weight on a canvas cot in a humid tent. He lay awake in the dark, suffocating heat of the Thai nights, his nervous system screaming. There was no position that offered relief. Every movement, every attempt to stand, sent shock waves of agony radiating from his spine down to his extremities. He was required to climb trees and execute hand-to-hand combat scenes while his internal framework felt like it was fracturing into 1,000 pieces. And as if the jungle decided to orchestrate a fatal symphony, a severe strain of pneumonia invaded his respiratory system. The stifling tropical air was already incredibly difficult to breathe, but now his lungs were actively filling with thick, heavy fluid. He was slowly, literally drowning on dry land. He gasped for shallow, burning breaths between takes, a wet, rattling cough shaking his chest and threatening to crack his ribs. His core body temperature spiked into dangerous, delirious, fever dream territory, blurring the lines between the fictional movie script and his own fight for survival. Any single one of these illnesses holds the undisputed capacity to kill a healthy, fully nourished adult. Jock Mahoney was fighting all three simultaneously, stranded thousands of miles away from modern American medical facilities. Yet the studio, driven entirely by the financial investment of the location shoot and the strict release deadlines, refused to halt production. They needed their star on screen, and Mahoney, trapped by his own massive ego and his deep, unwavering commitment to the stuntman code of absolute physical endurance, flatly refused to quit. He forced himself to continue performing demanding physical stunts while his internal organs were systematically shutting down. The visual transformation captured on the film reels was horrific, a real-time documentary of a man slowly dying. The 220-pound monument of American masculinity literally melted under the dense green canopy. He lost an unfathomable 45 pounds over the course of the grueling shoot. Picture the thick layer of flesh receding from the bone. The broad, imposing chest that once filled the screen caved inward, exposing the sharp, pale ridges of his ribs. His thick, powerful arms, once capable of lifting grown men off the ground, withered into fragile, trembling sticks. The thick neck that once supported heavy impacts shrank, making his head look disproportionately large. His face, once the square-jawed, handsome ideal of the heroic savior, shrank into a gaunt, hollowed-out skull covered in pale, clammy skin. He dropped to a frail, skeletal 175 pounds. The production crew watched in stunned, helpless silence as the invincible god of the jungle turned into a fragile, shivering ghost. They filmed a dying man and packaged it as Sunday afternoon family entertainment. He forced his decaying frame through the remaining stunts, driven by a stubborn, irrational pride that refused to let him surrender, even as his biology begged for mercy. He survived the grueling shoot just long enough to board the plane back to American soil, but the Jock Mahoney who walked slowly, painfully down those metal steps was a hollow shell. He eventually cleared the acute viral and bacterial infections, and he managed to regain a portion of the lost weight over the next decade, but the foundational vitality was irrevocably drained. The 3 concurrent diseases left deep, invisible scars across his internal organs, fried his immune system, and placed an unimaginable, lasting strain on his heart and vascular network. The Thai jungle had reached inside him, scooped out his core, and left a structurally compromised building waiting for a strong wind. This is the vital, haunting missing piece of the medical puzzle. When we look at the tragic footage of him collapsing on the Kung Fu dirt lot in 1973, we are not witnessing a sudden, unpredictable accident. The Thai wilderness had actively, meticulously laid the groundwork 10 years prior. The jungle frayed the neurological wires, starved the brain of vital oxygen during those severe, extended fevers, and permanently weakened the cardiovascular walls. The stroke in 1973 was merely the final, inevitable snap of a biological thread that had been violently pulled apart, chewed up, and spat out by the unforgiving forces of nature a full decade earlier. The jungle hollowed out his physical architecture, leaving a fragile shell waiting for the final crack. Yet, there is a rot far more insidious than tropical fever, one that does not register on a medical chart or show up in a blood test. For decades, the narrative surrounding this fallen stuntman rested comfortably in the realm of occupational tragedy. The public mourned the broken hero who sacrificed his joints and his brain for the sake of cinematic entertainment. But to accept that narrative is to accept a carefully curated fiction. We must now turn away from the bright studio lights and walk into the suffocating silence of the private, domestic sphere. We must break the locks on the heavy front doors of the mid-century American suburbs and confront a truth so repulsive it shatters the heroic myth into irredeemable dust. The 1950s and 60s in the United States were defined by a relentless cultural obsession with the perfect nuclear family. Society demanded a pristine facade. The manicured green lawns, the gleaming pastel appliances, the smiling wives, and the strong, protective fathers. Jock Mahoney was the ultimate poster boy for this fabricated ideal. On the screen, he was the moral compass, the man who rode into town to vanquish evil and protect the vulnerable. Off the screen, he projected the image of a rugged, dependable patriarch. But behind the drawn curtains of his own home, the heroic savior dissolved, revealing a predatory dictator who ruled his household through a calculated regime of sheer terror. The devastating truth did not surface through whispered industry rumors or sensationalized tabloid leaks. It was dragged into the light by a survivor. Decades after the events took place, the acclaimed and universally respected actress Sally Field, Mahoney's stepdaughter, published a harrowing memoir. Within those pages, she dismantled the golden idol of her stepfather, piece by agonizing piece. She laid bare a childhood defined not by the glamour of Hollywood, but by the paralyzing grip of domestic abuse. The man the world worshipped as Tarzan was, in reality, a monster lurking in the hallway of her own home. The nightmare began in earnest when Field was merely 14 years old. This is a critical age of profound vulnerability, a time when a child looks to the adults in their life for safety, guidance, and a foundational sense of self-worth. Instead of a protector, she found a master manipulator. Mahoney weaponized his towering height and his dense, muscular frame to suffocate the physical space within the house. He did not need to throw a cinematic punch to inflict damage. The deliberate thud of his boots walking across the floorboards was enough to freeze the blood in a young girl's veins. He used his sheer mass to intimidate, to corner, and to establish an atmosphere of constant, inescapable dread. The abuse detailed in the memoir was multifaceted, weaving a dark tapestry of psychological manipulation and physical violation. He operated with the cold precision of a tyrant, tearing down her self-esteem, isolating her from a sense of security, and demanding absolute obedience. He groomed a culture of fear, where his mood swings dictated the survival of everyone under his roof. Field described a dynamic where she felt compelled to constantly monitor his temper, walking on eggshells to appease a man who could turn an ordinary evening into a psychological war zone. He possessed a terrifying ability to switch from the charming, charismatic celebrity to the cruel, demanding abuser the moment the front door clicked shut. Consider the profound psychological torture inflicted upon a victim in this specific scenario. The young girl was trapped in a home with her abuser, but her torment was exponentially magnified by the outside world. Every time she stepped out of the house, she saw her tormentor's face plastered on massive billboards. She watched her friends play with action figures molded in his likeness. She saw adults line up for hours just to shake his hand and ask for his autograph. Society told her that the man sleeping down the hall was a god, a hero, a symbol of American virtue. This relentless public adoration creates an impenetrable wall of isolation for the victim. Who could she possibly tell? Who would ever believe a frightened teenager over the beloved, invincible Range Rider? The Hollywood machine and the naive public inadvertently served as his accomplices, providing him with a flawless camouflage that allowed his crimes to continue unchecked in the shadows. This revelation forces a radical, uncomfortable reckoning with the man's ultimate fate. We look back at the dirt lot of the Kung Fu set in 1973. We look at the sudden, catastrophic stroke that severed his nervous system and dropped him into the dust. Previously, we viewed that moment as a tragic medical inevitability, the sad receipt for a lifetime of risky stunts and tropical diseases. But with the dark ledger of his moral bankruptcy laid open, a new, chilling hypothesis emerges from the shadows. Humanity has long debated the concept of karma, the philosophical belief that the universe maintains a strict, unyielding, moral equilibrium. We ask ourselves if the scales of justice eventually balance themselves, not in a courtroom, but within the biology of the transgressor. When we apply this lens to the sudden collapse of Jock Mahoney, The narrative transforms from a medical case study into a terrifying portrait of cosmic retribution. Look at the specific nature of his punishment. He was a man who derived his entire sense of power from his physical dominance. He used his massive strength to terrorize a vulnerable 14-year-old girl. He used his mobility to trap her, his size to shrink her world, and his booming voice to dictate her reality. And then, in a single fraction of a second, the universe stripped him of those exact weapons. The dense muscles that enforced his tyranny were rendered useless, turned to dead weight, anchoring him to a metal chair. The towering height that cast a shadow of fear over a child was cut down, forcing him to look up at the world from a seated position for the rest of his life. The wheelchair ceases to be a mere medical device. It becomes a customized, rolling prison cell forged by his own sins. The profound helplessness he experienced in his final decades mirrors the exact helplessness he inflicted upon a child in her own bedroom. He was forced to rely entirely on the mercy and care of others, a man who had shown no mercy when he held all the power. The poetic justice is dark, sharp, and inescapable. The man who leapt from buildings and swung from vines could not even take a single step across his own living room. The tragedy of Jock Mahoney is not that a great hero was felled by a stroke. The true horror is that the hero never existed in the first place. The facade of the brave, self-sacrificing stuntman was nothing more than a hollow shell hiding a profound moral rot. His ultimate physical destruction serves as a haunting reminder that the debts we accumulate in the dark must eventually be paid. The applause of millions cannot deafen the silent cries of a single abused child, and all the fame in Hollywood cannot protect a man when the universe finally decides to collect what is owed. The cheap, ink-stained pages of supermarket tabloids and the frantic, sensationalized gossip columns of the era constructed a specific, easily digestible narrative for his final years. The press thrives on a predictable formula of tragedy, painting fallen idols in the broadest, most pathetic strokes possible. For decades, a persistent myth circulated through the public consciousness, claiming that the stroke on the set of Kung Fu left Jock Mahoney entirely mute, stripped of his vast fortune, and rotting away in a destitute, underfunded charity ward. It is a compelling, dramatic fiction designed to sell magazines. But a rigorous, objective examination of the historical and medical records shatters this manufactured mythology. We must correct the ledger and face a reality that is far more unsettling than simple financial ruin. Begin with the biological reality of his vocal cords. The enduring rumor that the 1973 stroke robbed him of his ability to speak is factually incorrect. The vascular blockage that occurred in his brain selectively devastated his motor functions, permanently severing the neural pathways required to move his lower extremities and trapping his towering frame in the wheelchair. However, his cognitive linguistic centers remained entirely intact. He did not sit in silent, vegetative isolation, staring blankly at a hospital wall. He could articulate his thoughts clearly. He retained his speech, still possessing the deep, resonant baritone voice that had once commanded television screens across the entire nation. Consider the profound daily cognitive dissonance of that existence. The booming, authoritative voice of the range rider, the primal, echoing call of Tarzan, was now emanating from a man who required physical assistance just to shift his weight in a chair. The cruelest irony was not that he lost his voice. The tragedy was that he was trapped in a motionless shell, fully capable of speaking. Yet, due to the dark, abusive reality of his domestic life, he had very few loved ones left who were willing to sit beside him and listen. Then, we must dismantle the ubiquitous myth of his financial destruction. The sensationalized stories insist his Hollywood fortune evaporated overnight, funneled into exorbitant hospital bills, leaving him to die in impoverished squalor. Review the estate records and the financial archives. Jock Mahoney did not die broke. The wealth he accumulated during his prime, the thousands of dollars handed to him for leaping down oak staircases, the lucrative television syndication deals, the premium contracts from his leading roles, remained securely locked inside his bank accounts. He possessed excellent medical insurance and substantial, well-managed assets. He spent his final years residing in a comfortable, well-appointed home in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by the material trappings of a successful cinematic career. The American medical system did not drain his bank accounts. He could easily afford the specialized wheelchairs, the home retrofitting, and the continuous round-the-clock physical therapy. This specific fact forces a radical shift in how we perceive his ultimate downfall. His poverty was not financial. It was strictly physical and moral. He had immense capital at his disposal, yet he was forced to confront the terrifying reality that all the wealth sitting in the California banking system could not purchase a single functioning nerve ending. His bank vault was full, but his spine was irreparably fractured, his joints were ground to fine dust, and his family unit was a scorched wasteland. The true tragedy of Jock Mahoney is far more complex than a simple loss of dollars and cents. It is the stark, cautionary tale of a man who successfully hoarded his gold, but irrevocably bankrupted his own flesh and his own soul in the process. Hollywood, an industry built upon recycling its own mythology and commodifying human pain, recognized the profound, dark poetry of his specific physical sacrifice. The studios did not forget the blood he left on their backlots. They packaged it and sold it back to the public. 5 years after Mahoney's paralyzing stroke, the film Hooper premiered in theaters across the country. Starring the legendary Burt Reynolds, the movie was a gritty, unvarnished, and cynical look into the grueling, bone-crushing reality of the Hollywood stunt profession. The narrative centered on an aging, physically broken stuntman who is reliant on numbing injections and painkillers, facing the terrifying realization that his battered body can no longer sustain the violent, unyielding demands of his chosen career. He is pushed aside by a younger, calculated generation of performers who use mathematics and technology rather than raw, reckless courage. The script for Hooper was not spun from thin air by imaginative writers. It was deeply, directly informed by the real-world sacrifices of the pioneer generation of stuntmen, with Mahoney standing as the ultimate tragic blueprint for the narrative. The film visually translated the exact physical toll that Mahoney lived through every single day on the set of The Range Rider. When audiences sat in the dark theater in 1978, watching the fictional character of Sonny Hooper wrap his scarred joints, strap on heavy leather braces, and wince in agony just to walk across the room, they were watching a stylized, accurate echo of Mahoney's actual life. The industry took the torn ligaments, the 16 severe concussions, the tropical diseases, and the final, devastating stroke of their greatest stuntman, and transformed it into a brand new, profitable piece of entertainment. He became a living, breathing, cautionary tale, a stark warning etched directly into celluloid about the true, hidden cost of manufacturing an American action hero. He proved that the human body is not a machine that can be repaired with box office receipts. He kept his fortune and his voice, but he spent the twilight of his life anchored to a chair, serving as a silent, paralyzed monument to the destructive nature of the very industry that made him a king. The heavy, chrome spokes of a medical wheelchair usually signal the definitive, quiet end of an action star's career. For a man carrying the dark weight of profound domestic abuse and half a paralyzed body, the traditional script dictates a rapid fade into total obscurity. Jock Mahoney rejected that script. His moral compass was irreparably shattered, and his flesh was effectively dead, but the deep, primal instinct of the Hollywood showman refused to flatline. The entertainment industry assumed they had seen the last of him lying in the dirt of the kung fu set. They underestimated the raw, terrifying stubbornness of a man who knew no other religion than the silver screen. 5 years after his nervous system collapsed, the bright, hot lights illuminated a soundstage for the dark comedy film The End. The star and director, Burt Reynolds, needed a specific visual gag involving an elderly patient in a wheelchair. A standard, cautious production would hire an able-bodied stuntman, place him in the seat, and execute a safe, controlled tumble onto hidden foam padding. Mahoney wheeled himself onto the set. He was not there to deliver a simple nostalgic cameo or wave weakly at the camera. He was there to work. He analyzed the physical geometry of the shot with the cold, calculating eye of a veteran stunt coordinator. His legs hung uselessly against the metal footrests, dead weight pulling him down, but his mind calculated the exact trajectory, the required velocity, and the precise angle of impact. When the camera rolled, Mahoney gripped the rubber armrests. Using only the residual strength in his upper body and decades of ingrained muscle-deep memory, he threw his paralyzed 170-pound frame out of the wheelchair. He tumbled hard onto the solid floor. This was not a carefully orchestrated illusion performed by a healthy, flexible athlete. This was a disabled, 59-year-old stroke victim deliberately overriding his own fragile biology to execute a physical stunt. The crew watched in stunned, breathless silence. The heavy thud of his shoulder striking the ground echoed through the room. He took the impact through his bruised bones and held the awkward, painful position for the lens. The sheer, irrational audacity of the act forces a complex, conflicting reaction within the viewer. You can despise the toxic man sitting in the chair, but you cannot deny the chilling, iron-forged willpower required to turn a medical prison into a functional cinematic prop. It is the unfiltered manifestation of the foundational American entertainment ethos. The show must go on, even if you have to drag your broken body across the stage to hit your mark. This defiant return to the lens was not an isolated incident born of fleeting nostalgia. He refused to let the industry bury him alive. Throughout the late 1970s and deep into the 1980s, the casting calls continued to arrive, and he answered them. He navigated the chaotic, cable-strewn floors of television studios in his chair, his hands calloused from gripping the metal rims of his wheels. He secured guest-starring roles on popular episodic television series like BJ and the Bear and The Fall Guy, working right up until 1985. Directors framed the shots carefully, often shooting him tightly from the chest up, or writing his strict immobility directly into the narrative of the scene. He could no longer draw a six-shooter with lightning speed or vault over a wooden saloon table. The physical dynamism was gone, replaced by a forced, rigid stillness, but he still possessed the sharp, piercing gaze that could cut through a camera lens. He retained the gravelly, resonant baritone that commanded the audio mix. He sat beneath the hot, glaring studio lights, the sweat beading on his forehead, delivering his dialogue with the steady, measured rhythm of a veteran who had outlasted his own physical demise. He hit his marks. He remembered his lines. He proved that the actor inside the ruined shell was still breathing. When the television rolls eventually thinned, dictated by the shifting tastes of a new decade, he pivoted his focus to the vibrant, fiercely nostalgic circuit of Western film festivals. Picture the echoing convention halls in the heart of the American Midwest. The air inside smells of stale coffee, old paper, and fading memories. Behind a long, folding table covered in hundreds of black and white glossy photographs, Jock Mahoney sat and held court, He was surrounded by aging fans who remembered the towering Tarzan swinging through the canopy and the fearless range rider dominating the dusty trails. He looked up at them from his seated position, gripping a black marker in his working hand, signing his name over and over again until his fingers cramped. He did not hide his paralysis. He wore it openly, a visible, undeniable battle scar from a lifetime spent in the brutal trenches of the studio system. He engaged with the crowds, recounted the harrowing details of his famous leaps down oak staircases, and soaked in the lingering warmth of the cinematic spotlight. He was a deeply flawed, toxic human being in the shadows of his own home. But under the bright, artificial convention lights, he remained a defiant, working-class warrior. He forced his decaying, half-dead body to continue serving the only master he ever truly respected, the enduring, unforgiving art of the moving image. He refused to be a forgotten ghost, choosing instead to live out his final days loudly, visibly, and unapologetically within the only world that ever made sense to him. The final curtain did not fall on a forgotten, isolated outcast left to rot in the dark. In 1990, at 70 years old, the frail, battered architecture of Jock Mahoney's body met its ultimate limit. A sudden, jarring traffic accident sent a violent physical shockwave through his already deeply compromised cardiovascular system, triggering a second, fatal stroke. The iron will that had stubbornly defied gravity, tropical disease, and severe paralysis finally surrendered to the quiet void. Yet, as he drew his last labored breath, the sensationalized tabloid narratives were proven wrong one final time. He did not die alone in a cold, sterile charity ward. His wife, Autumn Russell, sat steadfast by his bedside, offering the quiet dignity of a gentle touch as his heart stopped beating. When the time came to mourn the fallen Titan, 350 people gathered in silent respect. They stood together under the open sky as his ashes were released, catching the salt wind and scattering over the deep, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The American cultural machine possesses a fascinating, conflicting capacity to simultaneously revere and condemn its broken monuments. As those ashes sank beneath the cold waves, they carried the incredibly complex legacy of two entirely different men who occupied the exact same ruined shell. One was the fearless, working-class gladiator who leapt down oak staircases and swung through disease-infested jungles, willingly shedding his own blood to manufacture the ultimate illusion of rugged heroism for millions of captivated viewers. The other was the unseen dictator, cowardly hiding behind the glittering, impenetrable shield of Hollywood stardom to inflict unspeakable psychological terror upon a helpless child behind locked suburban doors. Jock Mahoney achieved a level of cinematic immortality that few will ever know, but his true, lasting bankruptcy was profoundly physical and deeply moral. He remains a chilling, permanent testament to a stark reality. The glowing silver screen possesses the power to build an invincible god, but no amount of box office revenue, adoring fans, or raw physical courage can ever truly wash away the dark, undeniable sins committed in the shadows. The applause faded long ago, leaving behind only unpaid debts and shattered lives. What are your thoughts on the harsh lives behind the fame? Leave a comment below. If you liked this video, hit subscribe to join us behind the scenes of Hidden Legends. Thank you for watching and goodbye.